Okay, I'm getting a couple of emails of students who are kind of frustrated because they can't read the numbers off the graph, or they don't know how to change the axes. So one thing is I've been telling you is that you have to have the same axes. Now this is just one graph, but you're going to have two graphs. You're going to have one for KCL and one for KNO3. And see how this one goes from 0 to 90, and this one goes on the x-axis from 0 to 60. You have to have the same axes for both of them. So if so find the one that's got the bigger natural scale and make the other one match it. Is the best thing. So, all right, I'm pretty happy with this scale. Maybe this could start, maybe a little lower. I could probably start this at like 20. So the minimum is starting at 0, but I could probably go from 20 to 90 and kind of zoom in a little bit. So notice that all I did was I double click on it, and then over here I see the minimum and the maximum. Same thing, if I double click here, I'll see the minimum and the maximum. Another thing I'm doing is before I get ready to actually read values off of here, let's say I wanted to read off the value, what is the solubility at 65? Notice this only goes up to 60. So I need this, let's say I want it to go up to 70 so I can read 75. So notice now the graph goes from 0, that's my minimum, to 70, that's my maximum. And that means I'll be able to read scales off of here. Now you may only have these big lines on here. These are called grid lines, and I get to them from here. If I click on the plus, see how I have the grid lines? And if you click on this little arrow here, you'll see I have major and minor, and I have the horizontal and the vertical. And if I click on more options, one thing I can do is so it tells me, so where they're set at is on the axes. So notice on the axes where it has the options, where I have these bounds. Notice down here, the minor is going to be every 2 degrees Celsius. So that's pretty good. So, halfway in between two lines would be 1 degree Celsius, all the odd numbers, and on the line is the even numbers. So that'll work okay. And then I need to also look at, if I click here, notice it will kind of show me the minor grid lines, and I can change their color. Sometimes the ones that they show you are kind of light, like sometimes it's so light that you can barely read it. So I like to change the color down to like mid-range, so I'm like, now I can actually see it. So now I can kind of see every 2 degrees on this scale and every 2 degrees on this scale. That gives me pretty good resolution. Unfortunately, it's still pretty hard to read. Okay, so notice that I want to use this scale to figure out 65, and I kind of go up just to get a ballpark. Note that I can't even see the line. I'm going to have to extend the forecast on this line. Note that if I double click on it, it pulls up the format of the trend line, and if I go here, this forward, this is how many X units. So it's going forward about 10 degrees from where it was. I need it to go more like 20 degrees. So I'm going to put 20 in, and notice it rescaled it for me. So, and it's now included to go a little further. So now I can kind of see it, but I'm still going to have trouble reading it. So I'm going to make this a little bigger. Also down here in Excel, you can increase the scale a little bit. So I'm going to kind of zoom in pretty good. And now I'm going to look here. So 62, 64, 65. So it's 65 degrees. That's halfway in between. I want to kind of follow it up and know where it is. So at halfway in between, and I kind of like count from the lines, at halfway in between here, it is between the 1, 2, and the third line. So it's about 2/3 of the way between the second and the third line. So I go over here. This is 80, so 82, 84, 86. So it's between, it's more than 85. So maybe I'd say 85.5, 85.4. 85 would be okay, but it'd be better if I can kind of push it and say 85.5. I'm really trying to get in here. If I need to kind of get in here a little bit bigger, I can really zone it in and say, okay, I remember this is 60, 62, 64, 65. So I'm looking at like, look, it's almost at the 86 line. So I'm going to say 85.7. And again, remember, just like with burettes, that very last digit is going to be a little bit of an estimate. That's okay. It's way better than just saying 85. So that's how I read the numbers off the scale. If you're doing this in Logger Pro, let's flip over to Logger Pro. First of all, to change the scales, if I wanted to change the scales, if you click on the high number, it will give you a box and you can say, so this is actually at 100.5. I can change it to 100 or to 70. On here, if I try to click here on the maximum, nothing happens. I have to click on the highest number. But if I click on the highest number, it's telling me really the highest number is 70. So I could make that 80 if I wanted to. I could reset this one. And the same thing on the low end. I pick the lowest one and I want this to start at 0. And here, I want this to start at 0. So now I want to figure out at what temperature, what is the solubility at temperature 65. In Logger Pro, it's much easier. I can use this analyze and then get down this examine. And I like to put on the interpolate. The interpolate means it will read in between. Notice when I do this, see this bar? It follows the long line. So I just keep noticing and I'm looking in this box here. It's telling me what temperature it's at. So I just keep reading it till the temperature matches 65. And you can use the arrow keys too. So when you get close, you can use the left and right arrow keys. Well, maybe, usually. There we go. So I can kind of zone in and I can get great precision. So this is telling me that at, okay, it's right on 65. It's close. I won't get exactly 65, but I'm pretty darn close. It's 85.6. Hey, I was pretty good. I said 85.7. So I just read it off of here. So Logger Pro is a little bit easier on this. Note that if I needed to do the reverse, if I needed to know at what temperature is the solubility 34, then what I do is I'm just watching the solubility. And when the solubility in that box is 34, then I read off the temperature. So that looks pretty close. So it's 14.3 degrees Celsius. So I get way better precision at being able to analyze the graph without having to squinting at it in Logger Pro. The downside is you got to download Logger Pro and you got to learn Logger Pro, which is slightly different of a program. But I think having these kinds of advanced analytical features in it actually makes up for it. So I would recommend using Logger Pro. I think it's much easier. Maybe that's just because I have old eyes that make it hard to stare at screens. I hope that's helped you with rescaling the graphs and how to read numbers off of the graphs.